Captain Leo Juan stood at the front of his ship, looking at the big screen that showed space in front of them. The stars looked normal, but something was coming that would change everything forever. The ship was called Use Defiance, and it was one of the best ships that Earth had ever built. 3 days ago, the aliens had sent them a message. It was not a friendly message, it was a warning that made everyone on Earth very scared. The aliens called themselves the Vorthan Empire, and they had been taking over the galaxy for many years. They had a simple rule for every planet they found. Submit or die. Li Haowan was a good captain. He had been flying ships for 20 years and had never lost a battle. But this was different. This was not like fighting other humans or dealing with space pirates. This was about fighting aliens who had destroyed entire worlds. The thought made his stomach feel sick, but he did not show it to his crew. Lieutenant Park Sue was sitting at her station working on the communication system. She was young, only 25 years old, but she was very smart. She had volunteered to be on this mission even though everyone knew it was probably a death mission. Her fingers moved quickly over the buttons and screens as she checked all the systems. The alien ship was huge. It was as big as the moon, and it was black like the space around it. The ship had a name that made everyone afraid. They called it the World Breaker because it could break planets into pieces. The ship had weapons that could destroy entire cities with one shot, and it had already used those weapons on 17 different alien races. Chief Engineer Kim Dae was working hard in the engine room. He was trying to make their weapons stronger and their shields better. He knew that their human technology was not as good as the alien technology, but he was not giving up. He had been working for 3 days without sleep, drinking only coffee and eating only small snacks. The other crew members were also working hard. Weapons Officer Cho Min was checking all their missiles and energy weapons. He knew that they would need every weapon they had. Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Hee was getting ready to help anyone who got hurt during the fight. She had set up extra beds in the medical room and had prepared all her medical supplies. Everyone on the ship knew that this fight was probably impossible to win. The aliens had hundreds of ships, and the humans only had 12 small ships. The alien weapons were much stronger, and their ships were much bigger, but the humans had something that the aliens did not understand. They had courage, and they would never give up. The communication system made a noise that meant an incoming message. Park Sue looked at her screen and then looked at the captain. The message was coming from the alien ship. It was another warning from the Vorthan Empire. Captain Lee Juan walked over to Park Sue and nodded his head. She pressed a button, and the alien voice filled the bridge. The voice was strange and scary. It sounded like metal scraping against metal. The universal translator changed the alien words into human words so everyone could understand. The alien spoke with a voice that had no feelings. It was cold and empty like space itself. The alien told them about all the other races that had tried to fight the Vorthan Empire. The Kaleri had been a strong race with many ships, but they had given up after the aliens destroyed 2 of their planets. The Thakari had been warriors who loved to fight, but even they had surrendered when they saw the world breaker. Ancient Nexari had ruled parts of the galaxy for thousands of years. They were very wise and had powerful technology, but when the Vorthan Empire came to their worlds, even the Nexari chose to surrender rather than fight a war they could not win. The alien voice continued telling them that humans were the last race in this part of the galaxy that had not surrendered. Every other intelligent species had either joined the Vorthan Empire as slaves or had been completely destroyed. The aliens were giving humanity one last chance to surrender and become workers in their minds. Li Han looked around at his crew. He could see the fear in their eyes, but he could also see something else. He could see determination and courage. These people had all chosen to be here. They all knew that this was probably a suicide mission, but they had volunteered anyway, because they believed that freedom was more important than life. Kim Dae had stopped working and was listening to the alien message. His hands were dirty with oil and his clothes were torn from working so hard, but his eyes were bright with anger. He was not afraid of the aliens. He was angry that they thought humans would just give up without a fight. Dr. Yoon Hee was also listening. She was thinking about all the people on Earth who were depending on them. She thought about the children who would grow up as slaves if the aliens won. She thought about the families who would never see their loved ones again. The thought made her more determined to fight. Cho Min was checking his weapons one more time. He knew that their missiles were small compared to the alien weapons, but he also knew that sometimes small things could make a big difference. He remembered stories from human history about how small groups of brave people had defeated much larger armies. The alien voice finished speaking and waited for an answer. The bridge was quiet. For a moment, as everyone thought about what they had heard, they all knew that this was the most important moment in human history. What they said next would decide the future of their entire species. Park Sue looked at the captain and nodded. She was ready to send their answer to the aliens. She was not afraid, even though she knew that their answer would probably start a war that humanity could not win. Li Huan stood up straight and walked to the center of the bridge. He looked at each of his crew members and saw that they were all ready to fight. He was proud of them and proud to be human. At this moment, he felt like he was speaking for every human who had ever lived. He told Park Sue to open the communication channel so the aliens could hear their answer. His voice was calm and strong as he spoke. He told the aliens that humanity had heard their offer and that they had an answer. The answer was simple: turn around and leave their solar system, or humanity would show them why. Humans never back down. The words were brave, but everyone knew that they were also probably the last words that humanity would ever speak to the galaxy. The alien laughter that came back through the speakers was horrible. It sounded like machines breaking and metal tearing. The aliens thought that humanity was being stupid. They could not understand why humans would choose to fight when they had no chance of winning. The alien voice told them that they had 12 small ships against 300 alien ships. The human weapons were weak and their shields were like paper. The aliens said that this was not bravery, it was just stupidity, and that the humans were choosing to commit suicide. Li Huan smiled. When he heard this, he looked at his crew and saw that they were all smiling too. They knew that the aliens were right about the numbers and the weapons, but the aliens did not understand something important about humans. Li Huan spoke again. His voice was still calm, but now there was something else in it. There was a strength that came from knowing that what you are doing is right. He told the aliens that maybe they were right, maybe this was suicide, but he said that humans would rather die as free people than live as slaves. Then he said something that would be remembered forever. He said that the aliens might be surprised by what humans could do when they had nothing left to lose. The communication ended and the bridge was quiet again. Everyone knew that the battle would start soon. The aliens would attack with everything they had, and the humans would fight back with everything they had. It was going to be the most important battle in human history. Li He looked out at the stars one more time. He thought about Earth and all the people who were depending on them. He thought about the children who deserved to grow up free. He thought about the future that humanity could have if they somehow won this impossible battle. The crew went back to their work, preparing for the fight that would decide everything. They all knew that they were probably going to die, but they also knew that they were doing the right thing. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up to bullies even when you know you cannot win. The alien ships were getting closer and soon the battle would begin. Humanity was about to face its greatest test and nobody knew if they would survive, but one thing was certain: they would not back down. They would move forward into whatever came next. The Vorthan fleet moved through space like a dark cloud that blocked out the stars. Admiral Kongwu was the commander of all human ships, and he stood on the bridge of his flagship called Soul Pride. He was looking at the tactical display that showed their 12 small ships compared to the 300 alien vessels. The alien ships were massive, and each one was bigger than the largest human city. Their weapons glowed with deadly energy, and their shields sparkled with power that could stop any human weapon. The Worldbreaker itself was in the center of the fleet, and it was so big that it looked like a small moon made of black metal. Navigation Officer Nam Te was watching his instruments with growing worry. He could see that the alien ships were scanning the human fleet with their targeting systems. The aliens were not even using their smaller ships to attack. They were so confident that they were going to win that they only needed the Worldbreaker to destroy all human ships. The alien weapons began to charge with energy that made the space around them glow with dangerous light. The humans could see the power building up in the alien guns, and they knew that in a few minutes those weapons would fire and destroy everything in their path. On the observation deck of Soul Pride, Ambassador Chun Hai was watching the enemy fleet through the thick windows. She had spent many months traveling to different planets, trying to convince other alien races to help humanity fight the Vorthons, but fear had made cowards of them. All she remembered her meeting with the Kaleri ambassador just a few days ago. The Kaleri had been a proud race with many ships and strong warriors, but the Vorthons had destroyed 2 of their planets and killed billions of their people. The Kaleri ambassador had looked at her with sad eyes and said that humanity had fought bravely, but his people could not risk losing their remaining worlds. The Thakari had been more direct in their refusal to help. The Thakari were known throughout the galaxy as great warriors who loved to fight and never backed down from a challenge. But when Shenhai had asked them to join the fight against the Vorthons, they had shaken their heads. The Thakari general had explained that they had seen the Worldbreaker destroy entire star systems with single shots from its main weapons. He said that humanity had impressed them with their courage, but they would not throw away their children's lives for a battle that could not be won. Even the ancient Nexari had refused to help, and this had surprised Shenhai the most. The Nexari had ruled parts of the galaxy for thousands of years, and they had technology that was far more advanced than anything humans had ever seen. They were wise and powerful, and many younger races looked up to them as leaders. But when Shenhai had asked the Nexari Council to join the fight against the Vorthons, they had told her that they had seen the Worldbreaker's power with their own eyes. They said that nothing in the galaxy could stand against such a weapon, and that humanity should make peace while they still could now. As the alien weapons charged for their first attack, Ambassador Shenhai wondered if all those other races had been right. Maybe humanity was just too stubborn to know when they were beaten. Maybe they should have surrendered and accepted life as slaves instead of choosing certain death. Captain O. Sang was the commander of the destroyer Inchin Fury, which was the smallest ship in the human fleet. His crew was only 30 people, but they were all volunteers who had chosen to be there, even though they knew it was a suicide mission. O. Sang had been working with his crew for the past 3 days to modify their ship in ways that would have scared the people who built it. They had pushed the engines far beyond their safe limits and removed all the safety systems that would normally protect the ship from exploding. Engineer Song Mi had been working in the engine room without sleep for 72 hours. She was covered in oil and sweat, and her hands were burned from handling hot metal pipes. She had rerouted the power system so that the ship could go much faster than it was designed to go. The problem was that the engines could only run at this level for a few minutes before they would explode and destroy the ship. Song Mi had calculated that they had maybe 10 minutes before the reactor would go critical and turn the ship into a nuclear fireball. Captain O. Sang smiled when he heard this report. He told Song Mi that 10 minutes was 9 minutes longer than they would need for what they were planning to do. His crew understood what he meant, and they were all ready to die for the chance to strike back at the aliens. The first attack from the Worldbreaker was like watching the birth of a new star. The alien weapons fired beams of energy that were brighter than the sun itself. 2 human destroyers were hit by these beams, and they simply disappeared in brilliant flashes of light. The remaining human ships scattered in all directions, using every trick their pilots knew to avoid the devastating alien weapons. The human ships were fast and agile compared to the massive alien vessels, but they were like insects trying to fight against giants. But instead of running away from the fight, the human ships regrouped and did something that shocked the Vorthons. They turned around and flew straight at the Worldbreaker at maximum speed. The alien commanders could not believe what they were seeing. In all their long history of conquering planets and destroying civilizations, the Vorthons had never seen anything like this. Every other race had tried to run away when they saw the true power of the Worldbreaker, but the humans were actually attacking when they should have been fleeing. The Vorthon fleet commander watched his tactical display with confusion and growing concern. He had fought hundreds of battles against dozens of different alien races, and he had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. The human ships were so small that they looked like toys compared to the Worldbreaker, but they were moving so fast that the alien targeting systems were having trouble keeping up with them. The humans were using their speed and agility to get closer to the massive alien ship. The Vorthon commander tried to understand what the humans were thinking. They had to know that their weapons were too weak to damage the Worldbreaker. Their missiles would bounce off the alien shields like raindrops hitting a mountain. Their energy weapons would not even scratch the thick armor, but the humans kept coming, and their attack was perfectly coordinated the remaining ships, formed a complex pattern as they flew toward the world breaker, striking at different parts of the huge ship at the same time. It was like watching a dance, but it was a dance of death. The Vorthan gunners fired everything they had at the approaching human ships, but the humans were moving too fast and in too many directions. The alien weapons were designed to fight other large ships, not small fast targets that moved like fighters more human ships were destroyed by the alien weapons, but the survivors kept coming. They flew between the worldbreaker massive guns and struck at the ships' defensive systems with their small weapons. The damage they caused was tiny, but it was adding up. Captain O sang in the Incheon Fury was leading the attack. His ship was glowing with heat from the overloaded engines, and everyone on board could hear the metal creaking and groaning under the stress. They all knew that the ship was about to fall apart, but they did not care. The human attack was doing something that the Vorthans had never expected. It was making them afraid. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Vorthans were facing an enemy that refused to be intimidated by their superior power. The Worldbreaker was still 1,000 times more powerful than all the human ships combined, but something had changed. The humans had shown that the great alien weapon was not invincible. It could be attacked and it could be hurt. As the battle continued, the Vorthan commander realized that he was not just fighting 12 human ships, he was fighting against something much more dangerous. He was fighting against the human spirit, and that was something that could not be destroyed with weapons. The humans were about to show the galaxy that sometimes the most important battles are not won by the strongest army, but by the army that refuses to give up. Even when facing impossible odds, there are some things worth fighting for, and freedom is one of them. The Worldbreaker prepared to fire its main weapon at the approaching human ships, but the humans were ready for this moment. They had been planning something desperate and dangerous, and now it was time to put that plan into action. Chief Engineer Kim Day had been working for 72 hours without sleep, and his hands were shaking from too much coffee and not enough food. He was deep inside the Defiance modifying systems in ways that would have made the ship designers scream in horror. The corridors were filled with the smell of burning metal and electrical sparks as Kim Day rerouted power cables and bypassed safety systems that were meant to keep the ship from exploding. He was connecting power lines that were never meant to carry so much energy, and he knew that one mistake would turn the entire ship into a fireball. Kim Day was muttering to himself as he worked with a welding torch that was hot enough to melt steel. He kept saying that the plan was completely insane, but then again, so were all humans. The plan had come from the most unlikely person on the ship, Dr. Yoon. He was the medical officer, and she was supposed to take care of sick and wounded people. She was not supposed to be an expert on alien technology or military tactics, but she had been studying the Vorthan broadcasts for days, and she had noticed something that nobody else had seen. She had called a meeting with all the senior officers and showed them data on her computer screen. The information was about the energy signatures coming from the Worldbreaker, and at first nobody understood what she was trying to tell them. Dr. Yoon-hee had explained that the Worldbreaker was so incredibly massive that it took several seconds for commands to travel from the bridge to the weapon systems on the outer hull. The ship was so big that there was actually a communication delay built into the vessel itself. Captain Li Huan had stared at the data for a long time, trying to understand what this meant. The Worldbreaker was the most powerful weapon in the galaxy, but it had a weakness that came from its own enormous size. Dr. Yoon-hee had continued her explanation, saying that if they could get close enough to the alien ship and move fast enough, they might be able to exploit that communication delay. But it would require perfect timing and incredible luck, and even then it would probably not work. But Captain Leo Wan had looked at the data and realized that this was their only chance. The plan was so dangerous that it was almost suicide, but it was still better than just waiting to be destroyed by the alien weapons. Now the plan was being put into action as the human fleet danced between the Worldbreaker weapon strikes. The remaining ships were following a complex attack pattern that had been carefully planned to take advantage of the alien ship's weakness. The human ships were striking at different parts of the Worldbreaker defensive systems while one ship prepared for the most dangerous part of the mission. Captain Oh Sang and his crew on the Incheon Fury were getting ready to sacrifice themselves for the chance to save humanity. Lieutenant Park Soo was monitoring all the communications between the human ships and coordinating the attack from her position on the Defiance. She could hear the voices of all the brave people who were about to die for their species. The voice of Osang came through the speakers calm and clear, even though everyone knew he was about to die. He said that this was Captain Osang reporting that his ship was in position and that the reactor was about to go critical. Admiral Kang Woo's voice crackled through the communication system, confirming that the Soul Pride had successfully damaged the defensive systems in Sector 7 of the Worldbreaker. The alien ship had thousands of weapon systems, but now some of them were not working properly. Captain Osang spoke one more time, and his voice was steady and strong. He asked Lieutenant Park Soo to send a message to his family telling them that he loved them very much. Then he said that the Ancient Fury was beginning its final approach. The small destroyer accelerated toward the Worldbreaker at a speed that should have been impossible. The engines were glowing white-hot and leaving a trail of plasma behind them that lit up the darkness of space like a comet. The Vorthons tried to shoot down the tiny ship with their massive weapons, but their targeting systems could not track something so small moving so fast. The Worldbreaker had weapons that could destroy planets, but they could not hit one small ship that was moving like a bullet. Osang ship struck the Worldbreaker hull and exploded in a nuclear fireball that was visible from millions of miles away. The explosion was tiny compared to the size of the alien vessel, but it had been placed in exactly the right spot. The blast tore through the communication array that connected the bridge to the weapon systems. Just as Dr. Yoon Hee had predicted, the Worldbreaker was suddenly unable to coordinate its attacks because the brain could not talk to the arms. For several precious seconds, the massive alien ship was confused and helpless. Its weapon systems were waiting for targeting information that could not reach them. The communication delay that Dr. Yoon Hee had discovered was now working against the aliens. Captain Li Huan saw the opportunity and immediately gave orders to all the remaining human ships. This was their only chance, and it would only last for a few seconds. They had to strike now with everything they had. The human fleet poured all their weapons into the exact spot where Osang had sacrificed his ship, and crew missiles, plasma beams, and kinetic rounds hammered the same location over and over again. The concentrated firepower was enormous. Something deep inside the Worldbreaker began to explode. The alien ship had been damaged in a way that its builders had never imagined. Secondary explosions rippled across the massive hull as critical systems failed one after another. The Vorthon engineers had built their ship to be invincible, but they had never considered that someone might be crazy enough to fly a nuclear bomb directly into their communication systems. The chain reaction was spreading throughout the ship. The Vorthons, who had conquered countless worlds and destroyed entire civilizations, watched in complete disbelief as their most powerful weapon began to tear itself apart from the inside. The impossible was happening right in front of their eyes. The Worldbreaker reactor was losing control, and the alien crew was trying desperately to stop the chain reaction, but it was too late. The damage was spreading faster than they could repair it, and the ship was doomed. The Vorthon fleet commander was screaming orders, but nobody could hear him over the sound of explosions that were getting closer to the bridge. His ship that had been the terror of the galaxy for so many years was about to become a tomb. The humans had done something that no other race had ever accomplished. They had found a way to turn the Worldbreaker's strength against itself. They had used the ship's own size to create a weakness that could be exploited. The explosion, when it came, was like the birth of a new star. The Worldbreaker reactor went critical and released more energy than some suns. The light was so bright that it could be seen from other star systems. When the light finally faded, the moon-sized ship was completely gone. Nothing remained except a cloud of glowing gas and metal fragments that would drift through space forever. The most powerful weapon in the galaxy had been destroyed by 12 small ships and human courage. The remaining Vorthon ships were frozen in shock and disbelief. They had just watched their invincible weapon be destroyed by a species they had considered primitive. The humans had not just won a battle, they had done the impossible. Captain Li Huan stood on the bridge of the Defiance, looking at the place where the Worldbreaker had been just moments before. His ship was damaged and many of his friends were dead, but they had achieved something that would change the galaxy forever. The humans had shown that the Vorthons could be beaten. They had proven that no weapon was truly invincible and that courage could overcome any odds. The galaxy would never be the same again. News of the victory would spread faster than light itself and reach every corner of the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear for generations would hear that the Worldbreaker had been destroyed by humans who refused to surrender. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The Vorthons still had hundreds of ships and controlled many worlds, but something had changed forever. The Empire of Fear had been cracked and hope was beginning to grow in its place. News of the Worldbreaker destruction spread across the galaxy faster than the speed of light itself on the Kaleri homeworld in the capital city. Ambassador Veltani was sitting in his office when the reports started coming in. He read them over and over again because he could not believe what he was seeing. The humans had actually done it. They had destroyed the weapon that had been the nightmare of every civilized species in the galaxy, the Worldbreaker that had crushed entire star systems and made planets disappear was gone. Veltani called his aide into the office and asked him to verify the reports. He needed to be absolutely sure that this was not some kind of mistake or false information. The aide checked with 3 different sources, and they all confirmed the same incredible news. The Worldbreaker had been destroyed by 12 small human ships in a battle that should have been impossible to win. The humans had used tactics that no other species had ever tried. They had turned the alien weapon against itself on the Thakari military command station. General Kex Bourne was watching the tactical recordings of the battle over and over again. He was a warrior who had fought in hundreds of battles, but he had never seen anything like what the humans had done. The battle recording showed the human ships attacking the Worldbreaker even though they knew it was suicide. The humans had coordinated their attack perfectly, using their own deaths as weapons against the enemy. General Kex Bourne paused the recording at the moment when Captain O. Sang flew his ship into the Worldbreaker hull. The explosion was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It was the light of sacrifice and courage burning brighter than any star. The general spoke to his staff about what they had witnessed. He said that every human ship in that battle knew they were going to die, but they attacked anyway. This was not the behavior of a primitive species. This was the behavior of true warriors. The Nexari Collective held an emergency meeting of their ruling council. For the first time in many centuries, the ancient leaders were genuinely shocked and confused. Elder Six Morani, who had lived through the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, spoke for all of them. She admitted that they had completely underestimated the humans. They had thought that humanity was simply too stupid to understand the odds they were facing. But the humans had understood the odds perfectly. They had just chosen to fight anyway. The Nexari had seen many brave species in their long history, but they had never seen anything like what the humans had done. The humans had faced certain death and had turned it into victory through sheer force of will. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, the surviving human ships were gathering around the wreckage of the Vorthon fleet. Captain Liu Huan stood on the bridge of the Defiance, looking out at the debris field where the mighty Worldbreaker had been just hours before. The space around them was filled with pieces of alien metal and strange materials that glowed with residual energy. It was hard to believe that all of this had once been the most feared weapon in the galaxy. Lieutenant Park Su was at her communication station, and her face was filled with amazement. She told Captain Liu Huan that they were receiving messages from all over the galaxy. Species that had never talked to humans before were trying to contact them. The Kaleri wanted to discuss forming an alliance with humanity. The Thakari were offering to share their military technology and provide ships for future battles. Even the ancient Nexari were sending diplomatic envoys to meet with human representatives. Captain Li Huan nodded slowly as he listened to the reports. He understood what was happening across the galaxy. Everyone was wondering the same thing. If humanity could destroy the Worldbreaker, what else might they be capable of? Admiral Kangwu's voice came through the communication system from his command ship. He announced that they had just received word from Earth Command that the Vorthon Empire was requesting a ceasefire. The aliens wanted to negotiate. A cheer went up across the entire human fleet. They had done something that seemed impossible just a few hours ago. They had faced the greatest threat in the galaxy and had won. But the victory had come at a terrible cost. 7 of their 12 ships were gone, along with thousands of brave men. and women who had sacrificed their lives for freedom. The names of Captain O. Sang and his crew would be remembered forever as heroes who had saved not just humanity but the entire galaxy. Engineer Kimday finally allowed himself to sit down in a chair in the engine room. He was exhausted beyond anything he had ever felt before, but he was also proud the modifications he had made to the ships had worked perfectly. Whispered to himself that they had actually done it. They had beaten the aliens who everyone said could not be beaten. They had shown the galaxy that humans would never surrender their freedom, no matter what. The Kostear Yun He was in the medical bay treating the wounded crew members when she heard the news about the ceasefire. She paused in her work and thought about the discovery she had made that led to the victory. Her medical training had taught her to look for patterns and weaknesses in the human body. She had applied that same thinking to the alien ship and had found the flaw that made victory possible. As news of the human victory continued to spread, something amazing began to happen across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of the Vorthons for generations began to hope again. On worlds that had been conquered by the Vorthons, people began to whisper that maybe the aliens were not invincible after all. If humanity could destroy the Worldbreaker, perhaps there was a chance for freedom. The Vorthon Empire had ruled through fear for over 2 centuries. They had convinced everyone that resistance was futile and that submission was the only way to survive. But the humans had shattered that myth with their courage. Governor Zeth Varan of the Vorthon colony on Kepler Prime was reading the reports about the Worldbreaker destruction when his communication system activated. A group of local rebels was demanding independence from the Empire. This was happening on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. The news of the human victory was inspiring rebellions everywhere. The Vorthon Empire that had seemed so strong and permanent was suddenly looking very fragile. The Vorthon High Command was meeting an emergency session, trying to understand how their most powerful weapon had been destroyed by a species they had considered primitive. The generals and admirals were arguing about what to do next. Some wanted to build new Worldbreaker-class ships and attack Earth with everything they had. Others wanted to negotiate with the humans and try to find a peaceful solution. The Empire was divided and confused. The humans had done more than win a battle. They had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. They had shown that the Vorthons were not gods, but just another species that could be defeated. Captain Li Hovan was still standing on the bridge looking at the stars when Lieutenant Park Su brought him another message. This one was from the President of Earth, thanking him and his crew for saving not just humanity but freedom itself. The message said that the names of everyone who had fought in the battle would be remembered forever, and that their sacrifice had given hope to billions of beings across the galaxy. Li Huan thought about Captain Osang and all the other brave people who had died in the battle. They had known that they were probably going to die, but they had fought anyway because they believed that some things were more important than life. The victory belonged to all of them, the living and the dead. They had faced impossible odds and had won through courage, determination, and the refusal to give. Yupas. The reports continued to come in from across the galaxy. Captain Li Huan realized that this was just the beginning. The Vorthon Empire was still powerful and they would not give up easily, but something fundamental had changed. The galaxy had seen that the Vorthons could be beaten and that knowledge would spread like fire. Species that had been slaves for generations were remembering what it meant to be free. The humans had lit a spark that would burn across the galaxy and nothing would ever be the same again. The age of Vorthon dominance was ending and a new age of freedom was about to begin. 3 weeks after the Battle of Seoul, Ambassador Chun Hai found herself in a situation she had never imagined possible. She was sitting at the head of a large conference table surrounded by representatives from dozens of alien species, and they were all looking to humanity for leadership. The conference room was on a space station that had been built specifically for this meeting. It was neutral territory where different species could meet safely. The air was filled with the sounds of dozens of different languages being translated by universal communication devices. Ambassador Veltani of the Kaleri was the first to speak. His people had been one of the first to be conquered by the Vorthons, and they had lived under alien rule for over 50 years. He explained that the Vorthon Empire had been expanding for more than 2 centuries, and they still controlled hundreds of worlds. The Victory at Seoul had shown that the Vorthons could be beaten, but they were still incredibly powerful. They had massive armies and their industrial capacity was enormous. They would not simply give up their empire without a fight general. Kex, born of the Thakari military, leaned forward in his chair. He was a huge alien with gray skin and 4 arms. But his eyes showed intelligence and determination. His people were known throughout the galaxy as great warriors. The general explained that their intelligence networks had discovered that the Vorthons were already building new weapons to replace the World Breaker. They were constructing 3 new ships, each one larger and more powerful than the original Elder. Six Morani of the Nexari Collective spoke with the wisdom that came from thousands of years of experience. She was ancient even by the standards of her long-lived species, and she had seen the rise and fall of many civilizations. She explained that the Vorthons ruled through fear and that the human victory had shaken that fear, but to truly defeat the empire they would need to offer the galaxy something better than terror. They would need to give people hope. Ambassador Chun Hai looked around the room at the faces of beings from a dozen different species. Just a few months ago, these same representatives had refused to even meet with human diplomats. They had been too afraid of the Vorthons to risk any kind of cooperation. Now, they were seeking guidance from the species they had once dismissed as primitive. It was amazing how quickly things could change when people saw that resistance was possible. The Kaleri representative explained what his people could contribute to an alliance. His species had mining operations on 40 different worlds, and they had access to rare materials that were essential for building advanced technology. The Thakari general offered something even more valuable. His people had the most advanced manufacturing facilities in the galaxy. They could build ships and weapons faster than any other species. The Nexari elder spoke about the knowledge that her people had accumulated over millennia. They had detailed information about Vorthon military tactics and technology that could be invaluable in planning future battles. Ambassador Chun Hai listened to all of these offers with growing amazement. The species that had once been too scared to help humanity were now offering their most valuable resources for the fight against the Vorthons, but she also realized that there was a problem. The other species were contributing so much to the alliance, but what could humanity offer in return? Human technology was primitive compared to what the aliens had. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, Captain Lia Huan was overseeing the integration of alien technology into the human fleet. The changes were incredible. The Thakari had provided shield generators that were far superior to anything Earth had ever produced. The Kaleri had shared their advanced sensor technology that could detect enemy ships from much greater distances. The Nexari had offered something even more valuable. They had given humanity tactical knowledge about Vorthon weaknesses that they had discovered over centuries of observation. Chief Engineer Kim Dae was working with alien engineers to install the new systems. His human crew was learning to work alongside beings from other worlds, and the cooperation was remarkable. Kim Dae reported to Captain Lee Huan that with the new alien technology, their ships would be 3 times more effective in combat. But he also expressed concern about what humanity was contributing to the alliance. The other species were sharing their most advanced technology and their most valuable resources. What could humans offer that would make them equal partners in this alliance? Captain Liu Huan smiled as he watched human and alien engineers working side by side in the ship bays. He told Kim Dae that humanity could offer something that the other species had forgotten. They had humanity could offer them courage, the willingness to fight even when victory seemed impossible, the determination to never give up no matter how bad things looked. The transformation of the other species was remarkable. Lieutenant Park Soo, who had once been just a communications officer, was now training alien pilots in human tactical doctrines. She was teaching them concepts that seemed natural to humans but were revolutionary to species that had lived under Vorthon rule for generations. The ideas of sacrifice and determination were changing how the aliens thought about warfare. Park Soo explained to a group of Kaleri pilots that humans were not fearless. They felt fear just like everyone else, but they fought anyway because some things were more important than fear. The concept was difficult for the aliens to understand. They had been taught by the Vorthons that fear was the most powerful force in the universe, but humans were showing them that courage could overcome any amount of fear. Dr. Yoon, he had been assigned to work with alien medical teams sharing human knowledge about treating battlefield injuries. She was amazed to discover that many species had never developed advanced trauma surgery techniques. The reason was that most aliens had been conditioned to believe that severe wounds meant certain death. They had never developed the stubborn refusal to give up that characterized human medicine. And he explained to a group of Nexari medical researchers that humans refused to accept that anyone was beyond help. They kept trying to save lives even when the odds were impossible sometimes. That stubborn refusal to give up was what made the difference between life and death. The alien doctors were learning that hope could be as powerful as any medicine. As the weeks passed, the alliance grew stronger. More species joined every day, drawn by the promise of freedom and the example of human determination. The Vorthans watched with growing concern as their empire of fear began to crumble. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy of worlds declaring independence from the Vorthan Empire. The local governors were losing control as populations that had been submissive for generations began to rebel. The Vorthan High Command realized that they were facing something they had never encountered before. They were fighting against a species that made others braver simply by existing. Humanity's refusal to back down was spreading like a virus throughout the galaxy. Species that had been afraid for generations were remembering what it meant to be free. The Vorthans had always believed that fear was the ultimate weapon, but they were learning that there was something more powerful than fear. There was hope, and once hope began to spread, it was almost impossible to stop. The Alliance was preparing for the final confrontation with the Vorthan Empire. The combined fleets were growing larger every day as more species joined the fight for freedom. Captain Li Huan stood on the bridge of his ship looking out at the growing armada of vessels from dozens of different worlds. It was the largest fleet that had ever been assembled in the galaxy, but more than that, it was a fleet united by something more powerful than technology or weapons. It was united by the belief that freedom was worth fighting for and that courage could overcome any obstacle. The Vorthans were about to face their greatest challenge. They had built their empire on fear, but they were about to discover that courage was stronger than any weapon they possessed. The final battle was coming, and it would determine the fate of the galaxy. But for the first time in centuries, the forces of freedom had a real chance of victory. The humans had shown the galaxy that it was possible to stand up to bullies and win. Now it was time to prove that lesson on the largest scale possible. The future of every species in the galaxy depended on the courage of those who refused to back down. The second battle of Sol was completely different from the first battle. This time humanity was not alone. The combined fleet that gathered to face the Vorthan Empire final desperate attack was the largest armada in galactic history. Over 2,000 ships from 30 different species had come together to fight for freedom. The fleet stretched across millions of miles of space and included everything from massive Thakari battle cruisers to small Kaleri scout ships. Captain Li Huan had been promoted to fleet admiral, and he stood on the bridge of the new flagship called Incheon Legacy. The ship was named in honor of Captain O. Sang, who had sacrificed his life to destroy the first Worldbreaker. The new ship was a marvel of cooperation between different species. It combined the best technology from across the galaxy with human innovation and determination. The result was a vessel that was more powerful than anything that had ever been built. Captain Park Su was now Admiral Li Huan tactical officer, and she was monitoring the enemy fleet as it approached. The Vorthans were bringing everything they had left in a final attempt to crush the rebellion. The alien fleet numbered over 5,000 ships, including the 3 new Worldbreaker-class vessels that were even larger and more powerful than the original. Intelligence reports suggested that each new ship could destroy entire star systems with a single shot. Admiral Kangwu voice came through the communication system. From his command ship, he spoke to all the fleet commanders, telling them that today they were fighting not just for humanity, but for every species that had ever dreamed of freedom. The Vorthans had ruled through fear for too long, and today they would learn that fear had no power over courage. The combined fleet was ready to show the galaxy that freedom was worth any sacrifice. The battle began with the Vorthans attacking with desperate fury. They knew that defeat would mean the end of their empire. They threw everything they had at the Allied fleet, hoping to break the alliance through sheer overwhelming force, but They faced something that had never existed before in galactic history. They faced a united galaxy that refused to back down. The Alliance fleet met the Vorthan attack with determination that came from knowing they were fighting for the right cause. Engineer Kim Day was now chief of Elite Engineering, and he watched from the Ancient Legacy as the combined fleet engaged. The enemy human ships moved with the speed and agility that had become their Stratomarcalari mining ships had been converted into mobile fortress platforms that could withstand enormous amounts of damage. Thakari manufacturing vessels deployed. Squadrons of automated fighters that swarmed around the enemy. Ships Nexari command ships coordinated the entire battle with precision that came from thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. The different species worked together like parts of a single organism. The Vorthans concentrated their fire on the human ships, thinking that if they could break humanity, the rest of the Alliance would crumble. But they still did not understand what they were really fighting against when the Vorthans focused their devastating weapons on the human fleet. The other species moved to protect them. Kaleri ships threw themselves between human vessels and incoming fire, sacrificing themselves to save their allies. Thakari fighters attacked the enemy. Balmas, even when they knew it was suicide. Nexari cruisers charged into the enemy formation to buy time for damaged human ships to retreat and repair. The galaxy watched in amazement as species that had been